5 block rules, symmetry, making depth. These are things that you've probably heard or seen in other videos, and I'm here to tell you that there are better ways to build a house in Minecraft. Not that these methods are wrong. I think that you can make beautiful buildings with these methods. However, the problem is that they can often be restrictive, limiting your creativity, resulting in buildings that look the same and even can compromise the amount of space inside, which is not that good. So in this video I want to go through 7 key things that I do in Minecraft as someone who designs and builds buildings in real life that I hope will boost your creativity and help you build better houses. So I'm going to focus on the basic things that I use for exterior building, with interiors being a totally different topic for a later video. This seems extremely obvious, but your landscape and surroundings are the single most important thing to building absolutely anything. So if you compare ancient Egyptian houses to ancient Greek houses, for example, they look totally different, partially due to their landscapes. So for the moment, let's forget about finding a super dramatic landscape to build next to. This is all cool stuff, but the actual basics of considering if it rains, when it rains, how much it rains, for example, what materials are nearby, what people might need in a particular biome are the most important things, as they will determine how you build and what you build in this area. Say for example, if you take a flat roof, as we can see here, in an arid climate, that's going to be more suitable than a sloped one that we see here. Whereas in an area with heavy rain, like in India, or more temperate regions like in the Mediterranean or whatever, a sloped roof will be more suitable than a flat one would be in the desert. It's a matter of asking yourself, if I lived here, what are the main challenges that I am going to face in this landscape or in this biome? I'm going to go back into these things in the later sections because they all tie into this idea, but just a general thought to think, what do I need? What are the things and main challenges that I'm going to face in this biome? That is going to go a massive way in actually improving how you build. What is different about these 2 groups of blocks that we have here? Which do you think could make the best house? It's just a matter of preference, isn't it? But material palettes can be very difficult to get right, as you want to have a perfect mix of contrast, but also similarity in materials. So something too similar will result in something that's really boring, a really boring flat house, whereas something with too many colours will look messy and confusing. So you want to strike a balance between colour and the more boring base materials to make a building pop, but also to emphasise certain areas and hide other areas. So you've got to think to yourself, where do you want someone to look? I like to think maybe you want someone to look at the roof because you've got a nice feature on the roof line, or on a balcony you've got a statue, or the front door, for example, you could have an accent colour to designate which one is the front door. These are just little things that you can think of when you're designing a house. So this also ties into your landscape. So think about what materials are local to your biome and what will best match the colours of the biome itself. And oftentimes in Minecraft, the actual biome specific materials that are local to a biome won't always match the biome the best. Say for example, acacia wood doesn't particularly match the savanna biome very well. So it's about thinking what will match my biome, but then what will also provide a natural contrast which will make my building pop out from all of the trees and the landscape. And something that people may not think about is the different uses of material as well. So you've got to think, what is something that would be a suitable roof, a foundation, the main wall material, your floor material, ceilings, for example. Very rarely in real life do we see houses with the exact same materials used in the floor, the ceilings, the walls, foundations, etc. It's very rare to see that. So as we can see in some of the examples that I've got here, I'm using different materials for the roofs, different materials for the base foundations at the bottom of the building, and then I'm using a main wall material with some accent colours, then a floor material on the ground floor, a different material upstairs to differentiate between the 2 floors, and it provides a nice contrast, but it's all about striking the best compromise between materials that you can find. So now that you have your blocks and your material palette, think to yourself what you think your hardest block is and make a foundation out of this. So I've got some examples here of different foundations and different room layouts that I have done in various different buildings. And this doesn't have to follow any particular symmetry. You just want to think about what your main room is going to be, and your main room that is going to basically allow people to move around your building, how they're going to enter the building. So perhaps a porch, maybe you can have different rooms that come off the main central room, like a kitchen or a lounge or a different bedroom or a storage room, for example. And then you want to have somewhere for a staircase that is visible, ideally from the front door, because you want to be able to walk into the house and see how you get upstairs, rather than navigating a maze of different rooms. So I have built super detailed and perfect front walls that are extremely detailed many times, and I've had no plan on what I'm actually going to do inside, which often leads to destroying a wall and starting over. So actually making this habit of planning out this building of where you want your walls to be, how big and how many rooms you want your house to have, by building a foundation, is actually the best way I find to plan out your house with basic shapes with enough corners on the inside and outside to provide interior and exterior spaces for decorations, plants, different things like chests or furnaces, things that you're going to be using. And some of the best basic shape layouts that you can see in some of the examples I've got here can often be just a typical rectangle layout that we've got down the end, or L shapes, U shapes, flatter U shapes, flatter L shapes, longer L shapes, T shapes, all these different examples. It doesn't have to be totally symmetrical. It doesn't have to follow what people like to use as a 5-block or 7-block rule. It's really easy to build with those things, and you could build a really nice modular system with that. But oftentimes you end up building the same building over and over again with just different materials. So a good thing to try and do is think, okay, what do I want as a basic layout? And then try and figure out the walls around that, look at it from above, and then go from there. Just talking further on materials, you also want to try and think about how you want your materials to change going up the building as well. Does it make sense that your heaviest material is your foundation layer, and then the main walls are made of something else, with ceilings and roofs made of something else, like a lighter type of material? This will help you kind of differentiate different uses of room as well. So taking this example in this house here, this Minoan style house, I'm using the sandstone on the right here in this different kitchen room, because I'm thinking, okay, this is where the hot ovens are going to be. This is where we might want an exposed wall where there's going to be, heat contraction and expansion in this room. So you want to leave an exposed wall, whereas on the other side you want a painted plastered wall, because you're thinking, okay, this is where I want to reflect light and I want to keep it cool inside. So it's these different things where you can think about, where you can say, I want to differentiate the different uses by using different materials, which is, quite a good, cool idea to do. Another way of thinking about this is, say, okay, if I'm building a timber house and I've got a kitchen area, think about making the kitchen area in stone rather than in timber, so it doesn't burn down, for example. So I'd like to talk a little bit about ceilings. So the fact is, flat ceilings are boring, and they're quite boring in Minecraft, and it's one thing that I think many people and many videos about building better houses actually neglect, is that when you have a flat ceiling that has no indication of structure in it whatsoever, it looks quite rigid and flat and boring, and it doesn't enhance your interior. So you're making all the interior do the work, when the ceiling is probably the bit that people are going to see the most in where you're building this house. And it just looks much more interesting with a little bit of depth when possible, and looks something like it has a little bit of structure to it. So I know I was kind of dissing depth earlier in the video, but it is 100% valid when talking about ceilings. So you can see just a couple of examples here that I'm showing you around, where I've shown, there's little indents that I've made by stairs or trapdoors or whatever that are indicating some sort of structure in the ceiling, which really actually adds to the interior when you look at it. So at this point, we are really down to the nitty-gritty of how to actually make it look nice. So you may be thinking that you've built the ugliest thing ever at the moment, but you got to trust the process. So windows help to make the face of your building. So the first thing you want to think of is where you want to look out from, and where you don't want to look out from, or where you don't want people to see you from. So the inside is the most important bit to consider when placing windows. So once you have some floors in, go around and knock out where you think you want windows to be. Don't think about the outside for now, just think about the inside. Then, once you have those windows, come on the outside and check if you think you like the look that you have. So things I like to check are if windows are in line through with each other, horizontally and vertically, and if not, what is the reason that they don't? And if they don't follow this pattern, you really have to think, why is it that this window isn't following vertically and horizontally? So it might be a sort of thing where you want a window that is an accent window, or as a feature window that's completely different, or often in traditional houses, windows are built wrong. So, you could use that as an example too. So another thing that's often ignored with windows is putting contrast around windows to actually enhance the shape of the window. So what most people do is they cut out a window and they put in window panes. And, depending on what you're doing, it can work in things like ancient buildings or more traditional buildings or whatever. I typically don't put any glass in these at all. I just put, for example, a single trapdoor in a window can really provide a nice look. Whereas like a window made of stairs, if you have a window made of 4 stairs, it almost makes it its own entire window frame in another material, which is a really nice different contrast to your main wall material as well. So now we should have a basic shape. So if you look around your building, you should be able to know what your main colours are from your colour palette. So in this Minoan Greek style house here, my main colours are beige and white, so an accent of brownish red in the form of this granite stripe complements it quite nicely. Or another thing I like to do is utilise signs and buttons to provide accent colours as well, to look like painted stripes or patterns on the building. So if we see this Egyptian one, they're typically more colourful and they're painted with different colours, so I'm using signs and buttons to add different colours and stripes and whatever to this building. So now we're also going to think of texture and wear and tear to this building. So if you want a totally pristine new building, you can just totally skip this step. However, most houses show a little bit of wear and tear to them, depending on their age as well. So I'm going to take a rougher looking material with a similar colour and replace blocks in areas lower down on the building and around corners to simulate wear and erosion caused by wind, building movement, etc. So if you see on a couple of these examples that I'm showing here, you can see where I've changed the texture in these corners and these lower areas to basically show wear and tear on this building. Now, typically the lowest parts of the building are the most exposed to soil moisture, weight of the building, but also for foundations to shift. And this is where you typically tend to see the most wear and tear on a building, particularly on stone buildings as well. So these sorts of things are extra intrigue and texture to your building, to your house as well. So at the top of a flat roofed building in this instance, you can even place a nicer, more expensive material. So say, for example, in this Egyptian one with the prismarine, or with the Minoan one with the chiseled quartz, it adds as like a sort of figurehead feature to the top of your house where people, when they look up, they go, wow, that's the nicest material up there. And it just adds another extra layer to your building. And lastly, we're going to talk about detailing. So this can be really, really hard to get right, but I find the best way to add detail is either by thinking how someone is using this house on the outside. So, maybe think that they're making swords under a canopy, or maybe they need a place to dry their clothes. Maybe they need a place to sit outside under the shade, You got to kind of think, what is being done here and how it's being used, as well as why people might paint something, why people might put patterns on it. These are the sort of things that you can think about to then add detail to your building. So say, for example, on the bottom of this roof ledge, I've added fence gates to basically serve as structure, or where things can be hung from. So it is just an example of what you can do. This also applies to plants. So lots of people like potted plants by doorways, or often have climbing plants on the side of their houses. So in the example of climbing plants, I like to think where climbing plants might best grow and where they have the most wall to grab a hold of. So say, for example, in a corner, on the corner of a house, or in nooks and crannies of a house, climbing plants are going to be able to root in more in these corners than on just a flat wall, basically. This is where they're going to be growing best. So in this example, I like to use just leaves and fences, but leaves can also just work fine as climbing plants. It's really depends on personal preference. This is also a thing that extends to placing small pieces of evidence of habitation on the outside. So here I'm adding flower pots and candles to ledges that contribute to the feeling of a house being lived in and not empty. Where oftentimes when people build houses, they build really deep facades with lots of detail and lots of different bits of stairs and whatever, but they don't put any evidence that someone's living there. So something like a lit candle or something like a flower pot. These things really go far just to add that little bit of evidence that someone is living there. So these are just some quick examples here of some of my do's and don'ts of details and how to detail a house, and what is too much detail and what is, kind of what I think, in my opinion, is just right for details. These are my 7 basic thought processes that I hope will help you boost your creativity. I can go into further detail in later videos on different building styles and designing more complex builds, but these basic rules apply for pretty much all houses, from ancient style houses to modern houses pretty much. So if you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, then please make sure to like the video and to subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next one soon. Thanks guys.